We are here at the Daily Detroit table at the Downtown Detroit Partnership Fall Forum at Michigan Central. And joining me is none other than Eric Larson, CEO of the Downtown Detroit Partnership. I think this is, you're a multi-time guest now. You're a regular on Daily Detroit.
I would love to be a regular. I do think it's been a couple times, but we need to make this a regular habit. It's great being with you, Jared. And honestly, the way that you sort of focus on what matters in Detroit is what makes this program so unique. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for covering, a little bit of what today was about. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. Community requires community-focused media, right? Like, that's why we always focus on what's happening here as opposed to the nation, although it all works together. And it kind of works together in this international context because this fall forum, this is the first time that I believe that you all have done a fall forum?
No, actually, we do a fall forum every year, and it's typically our development update. This is the first time we've done a bi-national fall forum.
Okay.
And we did that purposely. I mean, again, to your point, local media, local conversations like this are the way that we tell the real, authentic stories of what's happening. And that's what today was about. It was telling the authentic story about the partnership between Detroit and Windsor and obviously Michigan and Canada. And, there's a lot of noise in the system, obviously. And, it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. The reality is this is a generational relationship and one that both economies and both societies are very dependent upon.
So why now to reach out across the border, pull this thing together? There were officials from both countries. We talked to the Consulate General for Detroit of Canada. Some interesting announcements around Amtrak, the multimodal facility we'll talk about a little bit. But why now to do this and highlight? I mean, I was even looking at the booklet talking about the sizes of the downtown Windsor and downtown Detroit. And I think back to the beginning of my career when I almost moved to downtown Windsor. I was working at Channel 4 News, and I was like, maybe I'll live in Windsor for a couple of years back in 1999, just to say I did it, right? Like that kind of thing. It's always felt so close and yet sometimes so far, No,
I agree. And that was before, you were trying to dodge the draft. The reason that it was so timely is because there is a lot of conversation about what is the real relationship between U.S. and Canada. Obviously, tariffs is the big elephant in the room. Our governor who spoke today talked about the fact that tariffs is something that keeps her up at night, that actually she's very worried and focused about because of its impact both to our local economy as well as to our national economy. But the reason we did it today and the reason we lifted it up in a more public setting was that there were all of this collaboration, all of this innovation, all of these conversations and real concentrated dialogue about how we work together. But it was all quiet behind the scenes because nobody wanted to poke their head up. We said, let's poke our head up. Let's make sure that we're shouting from the mountaintops about how important this relationship is, how important it is that we continue the momentum and we continue the opportunity to figure out how together we're stronger. And honestly, Jared, it's been fascinating. The Canadian side, the Windsor side, I mean, you talk about Colin Bird from the consulate, he has been an amazing partner. He has been steadfast in his belief in the importance of the relationship. Tal from the bridge, from the tunnel authority, absolutely leaned in quickly. We now are showing the Windsor International films in Campus Martius as a partnership so that cross-border collaboration is strengthened and cultural connection is identified. So this is the time to be doing it. It's not because it hasn't been happening and there isn't a lot of good work going on, but it's because there is a lot of noise in the system that gets in the way of that good work. And we just needed to make sure that people understood that this is still a very important region, both locally and nationally. And there are serious conversations and civil conversations that are taking place amongst our partners.
Well, I think a lot of people think about the auto parts that go over the bridge. Well, soon to be bridges.
Bridges.
Right, bridges.
Yeah. Not to be confused with Jeff.
No, not. And then, you've got people like nursing workers and stuff with the health systems and things like that. But what about the synergy between downtown Windsor and downtown Detroit? I saw a statistic that kind of called out the two populations, things like that, highlighting them. Why is it so important to highlight the synergy between these two neighborhoods now?
Well, I think again, it's reinforcing what has already been, not only the case, but also, the focus of a lot of strong relationships over a lot of years. Everyone has a family member, everyone has a friend, everyone has some colleague on either side of the border. And you talk about healthcare. There are over 2,000 healthcare providers, mostly nurses and doctors, that live in Windsor and commute to Detroit to work at, for instance, just Henry Ford alone. You think about the auto parts. You talked about that. A typical car part. The manufacturing process of a car will transverse that border 7 times. So we are inextricably connected. There's no way that we can separate, the two communities. And what we will really have focused on is that there is this economic, the $150 billion of trade, the quarter of all U.S. trade coming through, Canada. The fact that we have now Gordie Howe Bridge that's going to double, that size, that commerce. But it really is about the people. It's about the fact that we have an opportunity to continue to expand and show cultural. Think about it. I mean, where else can you, in literally 10 minutes, be in another country and experience a different culture? Where can you go and be in Italian Village, in Windsor, again, it's 10 minutes away. Where can the Windsorites come and actually see some of the best professional sports without having to go to Toronto? We're keeping our fingers crossed for the Blue Jays, but especially after the Mariners, trounced us. But it is so important to think about this region as a whole, as opposed to two different communities. And that's really about a lot of what the Downtown Detroit Partnership's been. The other thing is we're making massive investments in infrastructure on both sides of the border. Gordie Howe, $6 billion plus. The announcement today that the governor made in terms of rail coming back to the Michigan Central campus and really connecting not just Detroit and Windsor, but Ann Arbor, Toronto. That's a game changer in the way that the region is focused and the way the region is viewed. So for us nationally and internationally, we are so much better if we highlight this really unique, because it's a very unique situation that we have here through the partnership with Canada.
I wanted to talk a little bit about that transit center a little bit, because you would be, not you, but the project would be condensing what's happening over on Howard Street by the Lodge, the Amtrak over there by the railroad, and Woodward up in the New Center, Milwaukee Junction area over here. One of my thoughts for you, specifically focused on downtown, are you thinking at all down the line about better connections between Corktown and downtown? Because if you're coming in town from Toronto or whatever for this thing, to say maybe you're not staying at what's going to be the hotel here at Michigan Central, maybe you're trying to go to the ball game or stay something down there. I feel like we could use better connections between Corktown and downtown. I feel like this could be a great opportunity to kick that off.
No, it's exactly right, and it's really funny. I mean, that you're serving this up perfectly, because our urban innovation team at the Downtown Detroit Partnership has been focused on a lot of those infrastructure. We're working very closely with MDOT and then obviously the city and our Corktown partners on Michigan Avenue, because Michigan Avenue on the east side starts at Campus Martius in the heart of our downtown and then comes west all the way through Corktown, obviously all the way to Dearborn. So we're highly, highly motivated to make sure that not only is Michigan Avenue re-engineered in a very interesting way, but that when we're re-engineering, similar to what we did on 375, we're focused on other forms of mobility. We're making sure that we're breaking down the barriers. We had a program with DTE, for instance, at that very interesting but yet not very pleasant bridge crossing between the downtown over the Lodge into Corktown.
And it's not the first place I take visitors.
Right,
Although
exactly.
I love James Oliver nearby, it's not the first place I take visitors.
But literally 4 years ago, we did an arts program with local, student artists, just to again show that there is a way that we can make the pathway between these two communities much more attractive. And so there is that investment. There's also the Second Avenue investment that now is going to be taking sort of that. If you think about DTE's campus and what the U of M Innovation Center is doing, and then going south down through and across into the Ralph Wilson's park as it opens next weekend, those are things that are really important for us to be thinking about in terms of linkages. And then the last piece is anything that we do that makes it much easier for people to move, whether that's through autonomous vehicles, pedestrian walkways, protected bike lanes. Anything that we do to make that more successful allows for a greater access to a better environment for the people that are living downtown or living in Corktown.
Well, and we haven't talked since this opened, but you're coming off all that work at Capitol Park.
We did.
which is really nice. And so how are you feeling about that now that it's kind of in place? I believe it's pretty much done.
Yeah, we haven't talked since the council. We now have 18 public spaces in the core of the downtown that we're responsible for. Obviously, they're all city parks and public spaces that we're an extension of the city on. Capitol Park is one of the most unique. I'm not supposed to have favorite kids, but honestly, Capitol Park is one of my favorite parks because one, it's just intimate setting. It's just this beautiful pocket park in this really unique neighborhood within the downtown neighborhood. It also is surrounded by probably the most interesting and most diverse density in the downtown. We have senior housing that was preserved, interestingly. 2 buildings of senior housing, when it came up to be refinanced, decided to double down and keep it as senior housing. We have obviously all of the market rate housing. We have all the retail. We have the office. It is such a unique community around Capitol Park. I couldn't be more proud of, obviously, again, the parks team and our urban innovation team for the visioning of it. Back when the DDA did it, no disrespect to the DDA, they just built a concrete park. I mean, it could have been, should have been just a concrete skate park.
I mean, I remember back in the day when it was the bus turnaround. So it was an improvement over what was there.
Very
right?
true. Yep. Yeah, and it does, and it allowed us obviously to move to the bus activity, obviously to a little bit different part of the town. But now it has the soft seating, and now it has obviously the soft ground and the plantings, and we've created a bigger lawn. So the things that the community wanted, because everything that we do at the Downtown Detroit Partnership starts with the community input. It doesn't make sense for us to envision something that doesn't ultimately meet the community's wants, needs, and interests. And so we started there, and I think if you haven't visited, I would encourage people to go sit in a lawn chair, and I guess they call them Adirondacks, but and really enjoy a beautiful park.
For people at home, because I think there's some confusion around this, how does it work with you being stewards of these parks? Because I think they're still city-owned, correct? But you are the stewards of them, and I think that makes people confused because they're just not used to it. Because maybe, I think about in my neighborhood, Sylvester Park is just all the city, and that's what they do, right?
Yeah.
So it's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, I really do give the current Duggan administration and the city council a lot of credit because they recognize that there were opportunities for them to divest some of the expenditure of maintaining these parks through a partnership with us. And so we have a long-term contract. We actually are on the second round of this contract that allows for us to not own the spaces. They are absolutely city-owned. They're assets of the city residents, but it allows us to find a different funding source. And so we are responsible for the improvements, the activation, and the maintenance of those public spaces. Take some of the pressure, obviously, off of Parks and Recs so that they can focus on the other 300 parks throughout the city of Detroit in a lot of the other neighborhoods that may not have necessarily the same level of corporate or philanthropic or sponsorship support as the downtown parks do. Because think about it. We have over 4 million people in these public spaces on an annual basis. We have over 34 million people coming into the downtown. There is an opportunity for us to leverage that in terms of funding to support these public spaces where other neighborhoods just don't have that ability. So for us, it's a very strategic way that we can help the city and help, obviously, the residents of the city maintain a public space that ultimately is a massive amenity.
Well, since you're with me, I have to ask you about it because another thing that's happened since we last talked is everything around I-375 and just a lot of strong feelings around how the project has turned out so far, and that, it seems like there's kind of a pause in plans right now and trying to figure out what's happening. There were some statements from the mayor's office about the business community and residents, and there's just been a lot of back and forth with it. From your perspective, where you sit, kind of what happened and what are you looking at going forward with 375?
Well, from the Downtown Detroit Partnership's perspective and from our leadership's perspective is the project, the public didn't like the project. I mean, and so why were we continuing to try and move forward and sort of force something down the throats of the community? Basically what happened, 50 years ago, we're going to just recreate, repeat history. That in itself makes no sense. And so we said time out. And it wasn't necessarily at the inviting of, the city or MDOT, but it was definitely in coordination with the city and MDOT. We said time out, let's bring in our own series of consultants. And through the very important support of the Kresge Foundation, we were able to bring in 3 different consultants, One was a urban design specialist, urban AC, Tony Griffin, who has a long history here in the city. Was responsible for the creation of future cities. We brought in HRNA, and we brought in tools, which is a traffic engineering. And so we were able to look at both the engineering, the urban design issues, and then the economic sort of impact of what MDOT had planned. And through that process, we were able to say, what you are designing, what you are planning to build, one is incredibly expensive. It ended up going from 300 million to about 500 million. You've got an interchange that will literally put businesses and sports and entertainment out of business for 3 to 5 years. That is not sustainable. And you've got a boulevard that wasn't really responding to not only the current needs and demands that are taking place on 375, but also now the new announcements that are taking place at the southern end with Renaissance Center and the redevelopment of the riverfront. And so through those conversations, we proposed through a peer review, which you can find at downtowndetroit.org, a series of recommendations. Those recommendations allowed us to start working constructively with the city and MDOT. And to MDOT's credit, and quite honestly to the governor's credit, and the MDOT director, Brad Wayford, they said, okay, time out. We have to take a pause. And they have formally paused the project. Now, as it stands now, the project is going forward, or being re-envisioned, I guess is the way I should say it, because it's not going forward yet, but is being re-envisioned, where they have now bifurcated the two projects. The interchange project, which was a massive undertaking, incredibly expensive, and was going to be very disruptive, is now a second phase. That will happen sometime down the road. That interchange was not failing. It was, there were a lot of, current day improvements, but it wasn't failing. So that's not something they need to fix now. It doesn't put, Ford Field isn't going to, move the Lions to, the big house for 5 years. So that takes care of that. And now they can concentrate on really continuing to focus on the boulevard. What does the boulevard look like? What are the kinds of things that we need to focus on in terms of legacy? What are some of the things that the community's input has been? And that doesn't mean that everybody is in agreement that, okay, you've solved the interchange issue, or at least, postponed that issue. Doesn't mean that the boulevard now meets everybody's, acceptance. We have businesses that are really important. You think about Greektown and the impact that they've had during the Monroe Street construction. This is going to follow that. That is something we got to really think about. You think about Greektown Casino. You think about Blue Cross has 10,000 parcels of mail. All those things we now can take into account, but we have a better budget, and we have a shorter time frame, and we have a better ability to create a mitigation plan that actually is responsive to those kinds of impacts. The other piece is obviously in the Lafayette residential community, we now have the ability to make sure that the things that they were concerned about, for instance, right now, it's arguably safer and easier to get across I-375 over the bridges from a pedestrian and biking perspective than it was with some of the interchange designs, especially the width of the road. If you go back with a 9-lane road, you're not making it at grade any safer to cross. And you sure as heck don't want to play Frogger, where you're going to some median and then go in the second phase of the lighting, the light phase, you're crossing the rest. So we now have the ability, and working with MDOT, they have started to make, continue to condense the road and really start to think about where are ways that we could test some calming of the traffic. You're talking about a mile of road. If you're going from Gratiot to Atwater.
I just want to make sure we have the listeners can draw a picture in their brain.
Yeah, because Gratiot obviously south, and so you're coming down south, boulevarding. You're now able to obviously recognize some of the past, but most importantly, we now have the ability to say, okay, is it really that different if you're traveling a mile at 25 miles an hour or at 50 miles an hour? The seconds that you're saving at 50 miles an hour are irrelevant because it's such a short distance. So we're putting it in perspective. The other thing is, again, at the south end, not only is they announced last week that they're starting the phase 1, the early works package with this storm separation, because currently the storm and sewer is combined. They are now separating that as part of this project, which environmentally is key, because whenever there's a heavy rain or a flooding issue, all of that gets combined and then it gets into the Detroit River. So now we're able to clean that up environmentally, and they're moving forward with that. It also allows us to really think about what is the interaction and what's the right design for Jefferson. That's been a problem. And how do we make sure that whatever is happening with the Renaissance project, where you now can, if Bedrock goes forward with what they're planning, reclaiming some additional public space on the backside if two of those towers come down, but you now can really think about what is the connection between the core of our downtown to the riverfront, which we've made such a massive investment in and have now 5.5 miles of beautiful, riverfront parking.
So for this relook phase and kind of thinking about that, is there any timelines attached to this, or are we still kind of fungible?
No, I think, MDOT obviously needs to move. We have federal funding that is attached to this, about $103 million of federal funding, which, no community should want to give that federal funding back once you have received that. It can't be reappropriated for some other use, so it has to be fit into this project. So there's a working, obviously, with the federal highway that's going to need to continue to take place. There's also the continued community engagement so that there is an understanding, starting the first of which is next week, where MDOT is having their first restart of the community engagement meetings. So they can start to talk about, okay, if we phase this is what it looks like. These are some of the things in terms of the boulevard that we're continuing to assess. It also allows a very important aspect of the project to catch up, because the city had not started its framework plan prior to MDOT coming up with their design. They now have got consultants on board and are working their way through a framework plan. So the city now will have input as to what ultimately, the generational impact will look like in terms of zoning and land use and those kinds of things that are really important. That should have been part of the initial. Now it's catching up and will be able to be brought together. So my guess, and I don't know that anybody has a completely clear crystal ball, but my guess is, we've got about 6 months to continue to redesign and reassess and really think about where are the areas that we can push hard without losing the federal funding, and where are the things that we can, potentially adjust.
All right. Well, before I let you go, let's change focus to something that I know there have been an active community meeting on, those caps over I-75. That's an idea that's caught the imagination of a number of listeners, especially those who live nearby, kind of mitigate the noise and everything that happens around this part of downtown Detroit. So why the caps, and where are we at the process, and how are you feeling about it? Because this is a project that has funding for research, but it doesn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but does it still need funding to do the thing?
It still needs construction funding. But Jared, it's really interesting. You've reported on this, and I give you a lot of credit for focusing on the district Detroit and what's the impact to the community. Lots of community meetings and conversations coming out of the community benefits process. The number one request coming out of the community benefits, and this is over 250 conversations with the community during that process for the district, was some way of reconnecting over I-75, because it really does create a moat in the core of our downtown between two very high volume areas. I mean, you think about the sports and entertainment, second largest theater seats in the country. It is an impediment. It also is both environmentally as well as just aesthetically not very pleasing. And so, we, working again with the city and MDOT, have successfully secured $2 million of federal funding for continued community input and design and engineering. That will allow us to get the project to a place where it will be, in effect, shovel ready from a federal highways perspective. That'll allow us to go back when there is federal funding with MDOT's obviously direct, leadership to apply for that federal funding. There are 3 caps. So starting on the west side, you're at Grand River, where the UMCI, so the University of Michigan's Innovation Center, sort of the DTE campus, that innovation corridor that Grand River has been created. You then move across to the center cap, which is Woodward, sort of around the Fox Theater, LCA area, Tiger Stadium, and then move east to Brush Street, behind sort of the Ford Field. and Brush Park area. Both of those, all three of those are strategically viewed. We're testing the size. We're testing, what could be put on top of them. What are the activations that the public would want? Do we do soccer fields, for instance, in the center? Because you could have as much as 4 acres. What we're trying not to do is engineer and design something that is not constructible. And so unlike the Big Dig in Boston, which ended up, costing 3 times what it was supposed to and taking, about twice as long to build, we actually are working within the engineering limits so that it doesn't become classified as a tunnel, for instance. So that requires extra ventilation and all, and different routing for hazardous materials and all that. We're being very strategic with MDOT and our city partners to make sure that we are able to do this, but do it in a series of interventions as opposed to one long cap. The other piece is, we really want to make sure that if there are opportunities from a residential participation, and one of the things that Future Cities, quite honestly, has been looking at is not just what are the legacy, what are the businesses, and cataloging the businesses and residents that were impacted by the Highways Act, but also what are some of the current day ways that community can engage. So is there a community development fund that people could actually participate? Detroit residents could participate. What are some of the activations on the caps or within I-375 boulevarding that actually they could participate in? So all of that is part of this process, and this process will last another roughly 12 months. And at the end of that 12 months, we should have a pretty good vision of what the community wants and hopefully have a compelling story to tell Federal Highway for some construction dollars.
Well, and I think it's fascinating for you to outline some of the forces behind it, as far as it being a tunnel and hazardous waste. I think that also impacts the design so much, because I think that answers some listener questions about well, why don't we just cover the whole thing? That kind of stuff,
Yeah, I would prefer to just cover the whole thing, but we probably would never get any of it covered.
Well, Eric Larson, CEO of the Downtown Detroit Partnership, thank you so much for stopping by. And until next time.
I love being with you, and I will always be here for you. So thank you for being here.